Hi, I'm Brian Hodgson, and this is the Sirens of Audio.
G'day, audiophiles. This is the Sirens of Audio, the show that explores the universe of Doctor Who and other cult TV in the audio medium. My name's Dwayne.
And my name's Philip. G'day, Dwayne. G'day, audiophiles.
Philip, how are you?
I am excellent, thank you. How are you going?
Really well. Now, this is a special episode because if you happen to be watching this and you're sitting in a live audience at this second, you're watching it before this has actually been officially released, because we are showing this at Carol Ann Ford's events in Sydney and Melbourne as a special preview, because we have on the show today a very special guest, someone else who was there along with Carol Ann right at the beginning of the series back in 1963, Brian Hodgson.
I know, pretty amazing stuff, huh? All that special sound. He's a legend.
An absolute legend. Came up with all the iconic sounds, the TARDIS, the Daleks, everything right up until Carnival of Monsters in 1972, 73. So 72, I think he left the Radiophonic workshop. But yeah, it's going to be great to talk to him about that. So I hope everyone enjoys this. Sit back, relax. We'll cross over right now to Brian Hodgson. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the Sirens of Audio a legend in Doctor Who, and that is the original sound man, Brian Hodgson. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you very much for joining us. Now, you're originally from Liverpool. Is that where you are now?
That's correct, yeah. No, I'm in Norfolk, in a village called Stalham, on the edge of the Norfolk Broads.
Nice. And I believe you've just come back in the last few days from a Doctor Who convention called Hooverville, which I've been wanting to get to for the last few years after seeing how good it looks. But you had quite a nice experience there, I believe.
I had an utter ball. It's very well organised, I have to say. In fact, one of the best organised Who conventions I've ever been to. And I was just amazed at the enthusiasm of the whole thing. The atmosphere was just so welcoming, friendly, loving. So it was great. It was wonderful to massage one's ego, providing you don't take it too seriously.
Exactly. No, it's all good fun. And we'll get to it, but you had a very, very important part to play in our favourite TV show. So you have a very important part in our history. Now, as I said, you were born in Liverpool just before the war. Do you have any memories of the war as a young boy?
Oh, Christ, yeah. I mean, strangely enough, Delia, Derbyshire was also a child of the Blitz, and so was John Baker. Delia was in Coventry, I was in Liverpool. John was in Southend, so he could see the flames in the sky. I mean, I was used to bombs going off, air raid sirens. One ammunition train near where I lived was blown up and a rock came straight through the roof of our friend's house, literally onto the bed where their child was sleeping, but her child was upset that night, so I'd gone in with her mum. I remember one of my first memories. I think it was the night Dumbo was released at a local cinema, and it was also the night that a quarter of Liverpool disappeared in flames. And my mum, we'd been to the afternoon showing, my mum running through the streets with me in her arms. because she had a horror of going into an air raid shelter in case it was hit by a bomb. Yeah, my whole soundscape is sirens and bombs going off and explosions and bullets and shrapnel. And we used to collect shrapnel as kids. It was like a souvenir. But I was very lucky. I was surrounded by an immensely loving family. So in a way, I was protected from the worst horrors.
What led you to the path that you eventually took? You said you served in the RAF for a
Yeah.
while,
Yeah.
and then you ended up in the theatre. Is that correct?
No, I trained as an actor, doing
Yep.
all the external examinations from the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. Uh, then I went into the theatre before my national service as a student ASM in Southport Repertory Company. I then went straight into the Air Force, and my intention was that I would come out and go back into the theatre, which I did. A friend of mine was an agent, offered me a part in a tour, which I went on. Through that tour, after it finished, I ended up at Liverpool Playhouse doing the Scottish play, playing very minor walk-on part. And while I was there, I was offered the post of stage director at the Grand Theatre Swansea, which I accepted, providing I didn't have to actually act as well as being stage director. So I only acted out of 25 of 26 weeks season. Leaving there, while I was there, I saw an advert for studio managers for BBC Radio. And as a kid, I'd done sort of various broadcasting and radio. And of course, radio was a big part of my life. It was a big part of everybody's life before television. You know, it was a ritual, things you always listen to. Anyway, I had a board at the BBC. I had an interview. There were 400 applicants for 12 jobs. So I had an interview, and then they said, "Oh, well, we'll let you know." So meanwhile, my engagement at Swansea had finished the end of the season, and they said, "Will you come back next year?" So I said, "Yeah, sure." And then I went back north to Bolton Repertory Company as stage manager and joint character juvenile. That was great.
So what was it that appealed to you in the first place about the theatre? What led you there as
I
a
didn't
child?
know. I'd done so much acting as a child. School plays, radio, children's are on radio. And I just loved broadcasting. As they say,
Yeah.
it's so much a part of my life. My early life was wireless. That was the thing. That was the main entertainment center of the household. I was at both, and that's right. And I was asked if I'd go for an interview aboard in London. So I went down on the night train because it was twice nightly. So I had to arrange the interview for the very first thing in the morning. So I could go down on the mail train from Bolton to London. Got there early, head of the board, and I was ushered into this room, which was tiny. It was painted red. There was an enormous loudspeaker in it, a chair in front of the loudspeaker, table, loads of scripts on the table, and a naked light bulb just about in the most annoying place you could possibly have a naked light bulb. You can never escape. It's just about there. And then suddenly a voice booms out, pick up script number 4 and read it. So I picked up script number 4, started to read it, got mic fright, and of course fell back to the old cliche, "I'm sorry, I'll read that again." Was eventually summoned upstairs to be confronted by about 6 BBC executives from program operations, all sitting in a line with grim faces, all wearing collars and ties. And I was looking like a scruffy stage manager from a provincial theatre. So we started the interview. I thought there was one guy gunning for me. I found out many months later that he was actually trying to draw me out. So I got home thinking I'd really f***ed it up. Rang my dad and I said, I'm sorry, Dad, but you're not going to have a son in the BBC. And the following morning, I had a telegram at the theatre saying a vacancy has unexpectedly occurred on the training course. Can you join us on Monday? So I said yes. So I came off stage on Saturday night, went home, had my case, and on Monday morning I joined the BBC. I was, I think, 22.
So it's about 1961, 62?
61, 62, yeah, it would be. And it was, it was quite a culture shock, this little North Country boy, then suddenly in the great metropolis. But in fact, they were paying me £2.10 a week more than I was getting in the theatre, in a fairly senior position. So it was all looking good. So anyway, I come down, I join the BBC, I get sent to the overseas services for 6 months, then to Broadcasting House, where with my theatre background, I end up as a drama studio manager at the end of the glory days of radio. At the end of the glory days of radio, my first job as a drama studio manager was on Val Gielgud's serialization of the Forsyte Saga. It was the last book in the series, and it was full of legendary names of radio. Carlton Hobbs, Dennis Blakelock, Gladys Cooper, just amazing people. So I had a really nice time. And after 2 years as a drama studio manager, I had actually worked with people from the Radiophonic workshop, a lady called Maddalena Fagandini, who was really an immensely talented lady. I would say equally as talented as Delia Derbyshire. But she was so talented, she was off doing other things very soon afterwards. But I did Cocteau's Orphée and a production called Living Time on radio with music and sound by Maddalena. And after 2 years as a studio manager, you get sent off to the BBC's engineering training school, which was very strict, slightly po-faced place. We studio managers, being the arty sort, were not forbidden from meeting the engineers, but it wasn't actively encouraged, shall we say. So we're taught all about magnetic resonance and all sorts of things that we would never lead in a month of Sundays in our real lives. Came back after that, and then you go on a tour of the BBC. So you see all the different departments, so you get an experience of what's going on. So I, as part of the tour, went to the Radiophonic workshop on a visit. Maddalena Fagandini, who I've mentioned before, had done an interval signal for the days when television broke down on a regular basis and you had a potter's wheel and things like that. And she'd done this lovely, attractive little link. And George Martin, who became famous later, heard it and said, let's put it on a gramophone record. So with glacial speed, the BBC agreed, and 6 months later they produced this gramophone record. And the piece, which had an added small group playing with it, was called Time Beat by Ray Cathode. And the other side, it was 45, the other side was called Waltz in Orbit. So that became sort of vaguely popular. So Desmond was then asked, Desmond Briscoe was senior studio manager at the Radiophonic Workshop. He was asked to do the radio show, which was an annual event where all the manufacturers showcased their receivers and things. And he wanted to practice his presentations. So he said, Brian, you're from the theatre, you introduce me. So I introduced him. He did his piece. And then I went back to my parent department and applied for an attachment to the Radiophonic Workshop, which was granted. And originally you went for 3 months, and then you had to go back to your department because a surgeon friend of the head of operations said, if these people are exposed to these very strange sounds, it is likely they will suffer mental damage. Eventually, they realized there was no point in sending you there to deal with all this new and strange equipment, because by the time you got to be able to use it, you had to go back to your own department. So I was lucky, myself, Delia, and John Baker, we all ended up staying. I stayed for 9 years, Delia for 10, and John for 9, I think, as well, and formed a little nucleus of people.
So during that time, is that when you were approached by Verity to come up with some sounds? Were you involved with Delia at all with the theme tune?
I'm a great friend of Delia, So Delia and I were summoned up to Desmond's office and told that the Verity and Warris were coming to talk about a science fiction program, which is going to run for 13 weeks. And we looked at each other and thought, where we last. Anyway, they came over and they said, what we really want is a signature tune by Ron Grainer. First problem, Ron had just very publicly said, I will never write another signature tune for television. Secondly, they wanted it performed by a French group called the Structure Sonore, who had been featured on Monitor a couple of weeks earlier. And these people, they were a jazz group, and they played on instruments made of beaten aluminium and glass tubes and all sorts. So sounds great. Unfortunately, the fee for Structure Sonore was far bigger than the budget for the program. So they just said that, and Lionel Salter suggested they go to see the Radiophonic Workshop. Well, Desmond said, well, I'm a great friend of Ron's, and I'd worked with Ron as well on a program called Giants of Steam. So if you like, I'll ring Ron up, because he said he'd always wanted to do something special with us. So he rang Ron, and Ron said, yeah, I'd love to do it. So that was one problem solved. Structure Sonore turned out to be Delia and myself. Delia did the realization of the score that Ron had written. He scribbled it down on some piece of manuscript paper because he'd just come from a session, and he ripped the top of a piece of blank paper off and wrote out the ideas and a few things like ghost bubbles and swoopy sounds. And so Delia started work with Dick Mills on it in one studio. Well, we only had 2 studios. And weeks later, Verity and Warris came up and listened to it and were blown out the water. And Ron said, geez, Delia, did I write that? And Delia said, well, most of it, Ron. She'd sort of done links to make the whole thing last for, a couple of minutes for the program. Now, I was tasked with doing the time machine. And I thought, this is exciting. So I went off next door. And being an arrogant 25-year-old, I was very firm in my ideas. I thought, spaceships are great, it goes bang, whoosh, rising note, spaceship, easily done. What does a time machine do? Does it go up? Does it go down? Does it go sideways? So I thought, well, the only thing it does, time approaches and recedes. So there was an idea for a technique to use, a technique called feedback. When you record a sound of one machine, feed it through to another machine, and it feeds back, and you feed that back into the original machine. So the sound appears to go away from you. If you reverse that, the sound appears to come towards you. So that was the basic technique. Also, I had no directions as to what sound they were looking for. A phrase, and I can't think where it came from, whether it was in my mind, whether it was Verity, whether it was Horace, or whether I seemed to think it might have been in an Aldous Huxley book. But the phrase was the rending of the fabric of time and space. So that gave me an idea, because I'd done a program on radio some months earlier where people were trapped in the hull of a cargo ship which had foundered on rocks. And we had in the workshop the frame of an old piano. And for that, I'd scraped my mum's front door key down the bass strings, slowed it really, really down so everything was cavernous. And I thought, well, that would make a nice scrapey sound. So I recorded some more scrapes, but this time we speeded them all up and made them at different pitches. And I added feedback going backwards and coming forwards. I added little chirps of white noise, which is sounds like escaping steam. Little bursts of oscillators that do beep, 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 beep. Put all that together, but didn't put a rising note on it because with the arrogance of youth, I thought I knew better. Anyway, they all came up. They loved the Sig tune. They were slightly underwhelmed. They were very underwhelmed by the TARDIS. And I explained, why there was no rising note. And they said, yeah, we can understand that. However, it needs a rising note. That took all of 10 minutes to put on. That was not a problem. And that was the easiest part of anything. And we put that on, and of course, the rest is history.
So how long did it take you to put that whole sound together?
About nearly 3 weeks.
3 weeks, okay. And it's probably now one of the most recognizable sounds ever.
Yes, I think so. It was strange. I mean, I spent about the first week puzzling how I was going to do it. I then went to see a film at the Kensington Odeon, and on the program, I think it was either The Damned or Exodus or something like that. And there was an interval in the middle, and I actually drew the score on a blank piece of paper at the back of it, and thought, well, that, it could well work. So it was 1 week with the theory of how I was going to create sounds for it. And then it was another fortnight actually creating the sounds, putting them together. ready to be played back without the rising note. So
Do you know how many layers of sound you have then? How many layers would there be?
there were, well, it wasn't quite as simple as layers of sound because you've got, first of all, the feedbacks going. So we only had 6 tape recorders in the Radiophonic workshop. So, and no multi-track didn't exist in those days. So I would say I used 4 machines in the coming and going things. And then I recorded GIFs, sine waves, bangs. All together, I'd say about 7 sound sources put together to make up the final.
And of course, that being one of the most recognizable sounds ever, you went on in the next serial to make another one of the most recognizable sounds ever,
Yeah,
and that's the voice of the Daleks.
yeah. Well,
Because we often credit Peter Hawkins or Nick Briggs these days as the artists behind the voices, but it was actually you that came up with that sound, wasn't it?
yeah. Again, it was a program I'd done for radio called Sword from the Stars that had a butler who was very polite and very British and very deferential. And I used my own voice on that. And I modulated it at a fairly high frequency. So it sounded artificial, but it was quite intelligible. So I thought I'll use that, but I'll change the modulation frequency. So I went down to Lime Grove with Richard Martin and Peter Hawkins, who I have to tell you is one of the nicest blokes in the world. And so we started experimenting with different deliveries and different modulation frequencies. So we decided, I decided on a modulation frequency of about 30 cycles, or 30 hertz, if you want to be accurate. And we realized that, of course, it wouldn't work on consonants, but it would work on vowels very well. So Peter deliberately extended all of the vowels. So it goes exterminate. So you've got all the modulations going on, but you still got the consonants not touched by the modulation. And really that's how it all happened. And eventually it was Peter sitting in the studio with the radio commentators, like the old-fashioned, voicing the Daleks live in the studio. And eventually, of course, as technology changed, it all became easier to do.
Is that what you did too, as the sound guy? Did you feed the special effects sounds in live during recording? Was that your job?
Once they left me, they were on tape, and the expert sound crew in the television studio, they fed it all in and sorted it all out. Later on, of course, we were working with film and videotape, so you had proper dubbing sessions. And then later on, of course, production schedules got tighter and tighter and tighter. And I think towards the end of when I was putting the music on, I was working with Dudley Simpson, a very famous Australian composer, who was also a brilliant guy. We had lots of laughs. And Dudley had a phrase, we'd sometimes get a cut version on Friday night. And Douglas said, Christ, there's 10 minutes of music to do. And this is before computers, before digital recording. And this is all done without multi-track. And Dudley's thing was, well, do you want it good or do you want it Wednesday? And they usually said, well, we'd like it Tuesday afternoon because we've booked the dub fair. So Dudley and I had worked through the night and eventually come up with the goods. Very often I was so knackered by the end of it in the dubbing theatre, I'd drop off to sleep.
Did you work with anyone else? Like, what about the music guys? Did you ever have much contact with them? Like Tristram Carey, for instance, was an
I
interesting one
knew,
because of his electronic style of music was
oh,
very out there.
well, I knew Tristan quite well.
Yep.
And he was another, all these really talented people are just so nice and humble, and there's no star thing about them. They're just ordinary blokes doing the job, and that's the way they feel about it. Uh, and in fact, Tristram outed me to an American journalist because he knew I'd been involved with Unit Delta Plus, which became EMS, and Tristram was a director of that. And he said to Tristan, did you and Brian socialize? And Tristan, no, Brian's gay and I'm straight, so we didn't move in the same circles. And because I always wondered how Louis had found out.
And what about cast and crew? Apart from the musicians, did you ever did you ever mix with those guys at all? Any of the cast?
Uh, Not really till the John Pertwee era. And I became very friendly with Katie Manning, who played Jo. In fact, we're great mates. And we had enormous number of laughs together. And I got on well with John as well. We'd go for drinks after the dubbings or the recordings. And that was a really nice time. The producer at that time was Barry Letts, and he was a really fabulous guy to work for. I did a lot of the experimental work on color separation overlay and things like that, all the early experiments. Uh, yeah, I miss people like Barry. They're very special.
Some of the sounds that you made are very special to my childhood. In particular, or you mentioned the Pertwee era, like the Spearhead from Space, the Auton
Yeah,
sounds,
yeah,
absolutely terrified me as a kid. Particularly in that serial, you had the Autons with a whirring noise in the background, which wasn't there for the next serial. I don't know why that was, but I always preferred the whirring sound because it made them much
yeah.
more frightening to me, and the sounds of those guns and everything like that. So, so thank you for that. Thank you for scaring the willies out of me.
Yeah, I'm sorry for scaring you. Like I was once accused of damaging the nation's eardrums um, because there was I think it was was it Spearhead from Space where the TARDIS is stuck in outer space, it can't move. And the reason for that was that they'd run out of money for the sets, and all they had was the TARDIS set. So they surrounded it with black velvet and put fairy lights to be the stars. And these monsters would appear through the window making high-pitched noises. And, people said, oh, those high-pitched noises, they'll hurt the children's ears. And of course, television wasn't transmitting much above 8 kilohertz anyway, so it couldn't possibly have hurt the kids' noise. But there was like a momentary thing was, oh, have we damaged our children's ears? They hadn't.
In terms of you making sounds, were you given a script and then asked work out what sounds are needed, or did the director come to you with a list of sounds they
Well,
wanted per episode? How
well
did they go about giving you the
it,
sounds to do?
I usually like to meet the director and chat to them first about. I mean, they would send me a script and I would read it and think about it. Then I'd meet the director, and sometimes they had very, bright ideas. Sometimes they'd just say, "Well, I want something mysterious," or a sort of sound nobody's ever heard before. That sort of wonderful vague thing. Sometimes they're very specific. Sometimes I would look at the planet and the story and try and imagine a sort of fantasy technology that existed. And really, depending on the latest gadget our engineer had made. Um, so I would then try and base all of the sounds in the entire series on that imaginary technology in my head. And it gave a homogeneity to the whole story. That's what I was trying to do. And that could lead you into very serious mistakes. And I think I did a thing for Morris Barry when I decided as a sound source I would use the laughter of a particular actress. It's one of the biggest mistakes of my life. That was the most difficult one I ever did. I can't even remember now what it was called. I think I think something called quarks or something like that. So anyway,
Oh, yes. The
I'm,
Dominators.
yeah, I'm I'm 87 now, so there are gaps in my memory all those years ago.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that particular story, you were credited with being the special sounds person instead, because there was no incidental music in that story, and other
Yeah,
stories like The Wheel in Space and
yeah.
The
Oh,
Crotons.
the
I'm
Crotons, yeah.
Robert.
The
Yeah.
Crotons. I suddenly was asked to sign an album of the Crotons' music. I didn't even know they'd been made into an album. Nobody had told me, and
Not
nobody
paying
had given me a free copy. Yeah.
you.
Um,
Well, that's the
yeah.
big question, isn't it? How much extra did they pay you for doing this
Nothing.
incidental music?
We had a BBC staff contract. We didn't get paid any extra. Didn't matter if we work all through the night. You didn't get paid any extra. You had an irregular hour allowance, which was about £100 a year. Um, but that was all part of your job. Can I just point out one thing?
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
I was never a fan. I worked on Doctor Who. I was never a fan.
What you did was going to last more than 13 weeks, did you?
No, we didn't. So
What were the kind of programs you liked to work on? What were your favorite programs?
radio drama. I did a lot of work with Patrick Garland in his arts programs. Um, I loved working with people like Philip Saville. Um, in fact, my first job with Philip Saville was a program called The Machine Stops as part of the Out of the Unknown series. And it is an amazing story on the basis of the idea that the world has been destroyed and everyone's living underground in a machine. And then one day the machine starts to break down and nobody can remember how to repair the breakdown machinery, and which stops it from breaking down. Anyway, we did that. And so I did about another 5 programs with Philip because he's such an imaginative director. And that program actually won a film festival in Venice. BBC had entered it, but nobody had told Philip or I. And I read about it in Sunday Times. And I was reading, British television programs, first program to win a film festival. And the phone went with Philip Saville saying, "Who knew about this?" And it was only the producer had entered it and she'd gone off to collect the prize. It didn't tell Philip, right? So I loved it with Philip. I loved working with Patrick Garland. There was a lovely lady called Margaret Dale who did ballet. And I remember doing, I think it was 10 minutes of silence for her, which was a great challenge and very special. I think another Patrick Garland's was a Beckett, beginning to end. That was special for me. There were so many but there's some of them still stick out, when the mists of old age start crowding in on the memory. And when this is finished, I should have mentioned so and so or so and so. Anyway, I
So,
didn't.
so in about 1968, you opened up a studio with Delia and
Well, I got
is it David Vorhaus? And
no
you released an album called White
electric storm by the white noise.
White
White,
Noise. Yeah. How did that come
white.
about?
Well, Delia and I, there's some little good because you're not supposed, if you work for BBC, you're not supposed to freelance outside. But Desmond was very keen that we didn't get too introspective. And it was important that we um, experience all sorts of other art forms. So Delia met Peter Zinoviev. He had a studio in Putney, and we formed a company called Unit Delta Plus. We worked in his studio in Putney occasionally, maybe. We did Paul Schofield's Macbeth at Stratford and various other bits and pieces. And then we were asked to do a lecture at the Royal Academy of Music that Peter Zinoviev had arranged. He didn't bother to tell Delia or I that uh, even the title of the lecture. So we had prepared a whole pile of stuff. He didn't either tell us happenings were very important in those days. Spontaneous events would occur, usually very well. Fine if you knew it was going to happen. But when you didn't, as Delia and I didn't, it was very disconcerting. I walked off the platform and went and sat with Tristram Cary and Daphne Oram in the audience. And that night, Delia and I dissolved the partnership with Peter Zinoviev, although we stayed friends, but we just said we're going in different directions. We'd also done a lecture at Morley College, and at the end of this lecture, this sort of scruffy, demented hippie shot down the aisle and started chatting, making a beeline to Delia. Delia immediately fell in last minute, and we formed Kaleidophon. And Delia and David wrote all the music for that. I provided the voice of the dead biker. I found an American lyricist who wrote all the words. And I provided the voices of the noisy neighbors in Here Come the Fleas. But apart from that, I was there for most of the time. And the sound montage at the beginning of the visitation. But it was really David and Delia, I always think, who did that.
It was an
So
interesting
that,
record because I'm a bit of a fan of the krautrock scene of that time. The
yeah,
krautrock was sort of splitting off. Half of the krautrockers were going percussive, and the other half were going electronic.
yeah.
And I'm curious to know whether the Germans were watching the Brits, or whether the Brits were watching what was the Germans were doing, or everyone was just experimenting with their own thing. Do you
No, I
recall?
think the, the thing was, I mean, things were not easy to do in those days. You were wrestling with equipment the whole time. And we were
Mm.
also busy doing what we were doing to not be taking too much notice of what everybody else was doing. So
Yeah.
when we heard that stuff eventually, well, yeah, it was interesting. Like Mike Oldfield and Tubular Bells, amazing breakthroughs.
Mm. Absolutely. So tell us about your collaboration with Dudley Simpson outside your outside project.
Oh yeah, I did an album when I founded Electrophon. We did a sort of rather substandard Walter Carlos type thing um, with an orchestra and electronics. Yeah, I was like most of those records, you'd sell a couple of thousand, but that was about the interest in those days. Uh, we always boasted that Electric Storm was released by Polydor on the secret list. So there was no publicity. And in fact, we didn't know it had been released for 3 weeks afterwards, but that's just one of the things you do when you're minor little groups experimenting.
You'd left the Radiophonic Workshop in 1972, but
Yeah.
I have to ask. Later on, you were doing your um, uh, other projects. Who is Nikki St. John? Who is that?
Me. Delia and I, we'd done a mood music album uh, for Standard Music. Nicky St. George, by the way, not St. John.
Ah,
And Delia was Lee de la Rousse. Um,
gotcha.
yeah, so that was for the Standard Music Library. That still occasionally gets on plays and probably earns about 40 quid a year.
So
Gotcha.
why did you choose not to use your name for that?
uh, we didn't, because our names were getting known with Doctor Who, we didn't want the BBC connection to be too obvious.
Oh.
Did we be talking about Legend of Hell House? Oh, that was one of the first things we did when I left the BBC.
Oh, what's that?
Tell
What
us
was that
about
then?
it. Tell us about
So
it.
72 or 73, I think, early 73. Knew we were approached to do this horror movie. Um, it was a very painful experience because Delia was supposed to join me in the Electrophone and she came to see the Rushes and things like that, but she was in an exhausted, mentally exhausted state. Uh, so I suddenly found myself doing it all by myself. And it was exhausting. The producer, Albert Fowler, was brilliant. He uh, supported me and used some of my material in different ways in the movie. Anyway, but at the end of it, I got a really nice letter from the head of MGM um, congratulating us on this sound score. But it really was soundboard based on voices. And also Derek Jarman's Tempest. As one of the other films we did. And of course, earlier than that, we'd done The Work is a Four-Letter Word, feature film. And I'd done with various sort of theatre and other things.
Then you went on to there was another project in the mid-70s that were involved with called Wavemaker
That's right.
with
Well, that
John
was when,
Lewis. How did that come about?
well, that came about really because I was also doing ballets with Ballet Rambert for Christopher Bruce. I did, I think, 4 ballets with Christopher. Um, And that came about because I had been working with a kinetic sculptor called Peter Logan. And so he introduced me to Christopher. Christopher had heard what I'd done for Peter and asked me to do some ballets. Anyway, so I met John Lewis one night at a party. I think it was given by Wayne Sleep anyway. I saw John, we started chatting, and he said he was a composer. And we left the party and said, we must meet up again sometime. Because he had to go off to do a score for Ballet Rambert for Norman Morris. It was called a ballet called Spindrift, I found out later. Anyway, I was working with Chris Bruce, and I'd been at one of his rehearsals, coming downstairs in their building, and I heard this music. And I thought, Jesus, I really love that. So I just stood outside waiting till the orchestra finished rehearsing. And John walked out. He was the composer of it. And so then John came to look at my studio, Electrophonic, and rang me up one day and said, I'd quite like to buy a synthesizer. Would you advise me? So I said, yeah, so come around the studio. And we went up Tottenham Court Road where all the music shops were and realized that none of the people in the music shop knew anything about synthesizers. I mean, they had them there, but nobody knew what to do with them. So we got back to the studio having coffee, and I said, look, Delia's gone north to act as a radio operator on a pipeline. So she's not going to be part of Electrophon anymore. Why don't you take her place? And instead of buying a synthesizer, buy into the studio, and which he did. And then we did Where Are We, Captain, New Atlantis.
I listened to Where Are We Captain today, actually. I really enjoyed that. It was really good.
It has some really nice things there. Did you
Yeah.
ever know about Zygote?
No.
Well, that's another album I think you might find very interesting. Uh, when I was working with Ballet Rambert, uh, they invited Louis Falco to come over from New York uh, to do a ballet with Rambert. And he brought his composer, a guy called Bert Alcantara, with him. Bert was an amazing, weird guy. And I loved his score. The ballet was called Tutti Frutti. And I just loved his score. And I said, Bert, why don't you come and put it on gramophone record? I've got a contract with Polydor, you know. So he did. And he was able to do things he couldn't do anywhere else because I had an electronic sequencer and things. And he had his own harp. And I didn't have an harp. I had different synthesizers. So we were able to do things faster than possibly could ever be played and things like that, simply by speeding up the sequencer. And that was released. Again, it sold a few thousand, but it's a sort of like White Noise. It's a cult album. And they say, oh no, this was a seminal thing, and we were just doing the work. I mean, we didn't think this is historic. It ain't. It wasn't. We were just doing the job and trying to earn a few bob. And
So
we
that's
also
called Zygote, is it?
Zygote,
Zygote.
Zogoat. I may have the sleeve of it, which is an
Okay.
interesting sleeve.
Oh, that's good. I like that. Can you just
There was,
lift it a bit higher? Because there's something down the bottom that... there we are. That's nice.
it was
Who's the artist that did that?
Laszlo Kubinski. He was a friend
Okay.
of mine in America. And he sent it over. It was painted on plaster like a fresco.
Right.
I know the head of standard music wanted to buy it, but I think Laszlo wanted it back.
Cool. So after Wavemaker 1977, is that when you went back to the Radiophonic workshop, or was that a little bit later?
That was a little bit later. Yeah, I had a visit from Paddy Kingsland. Sorry, it's just rearranged. I see it. From Paddy Kingsland, who you'll know from Hitcher, is
Yep.
Hitcher, this guy, asking if I would ever consider going back. And I thought, well, we'd been swindled out of a lot of money by our accountant. So, we're not on the bread line, but we're almost on the bread line. And I thought, well, we'd been developing at Electrophon some very sophisticated equipment. We had developed much more stable filters and oscillators. We developed a polyphonic keyboard. In that time, synthesizers were not polyphonic. And this was all for voltage control, I have to insist. So I thought, well, if I went back and I was able to upgrade the workshop, we could use some of these new, more sophisticated pieces of equipment. So I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, but it's not a matter of life and death. So I went into the interview board, really not fussed if I got the job or not. And so they offered me the job. It was assistant head of the department, Desmond Briscoe's assistant. Because Desmond wanted to concentrate more on making radio programs, which he was very good at. So they offered me a job, and I said, well, you'll have to wait for 3 months while I train John to use Electrophone studio equipment.
Ah.
thinking they sod that. And I said, no, yes, that's perfectly all right, and from taking home probably about 30 quid a week, I sort of headed up on a salary of considerably larger than that, which was very nice. Because I was just buying a house with my partner.
How much had technology changed in the time you've been away? You said that originally you wanted to have an eight
Vastly,
track.
vastly. Everything was just more sophisticated, more stable. I mean, in other studios, we're having 16 and 24 track machines. The Radiophonic work, I had an 8-track machine in my studio. The Radiophonic workshop didn't even have an 8-track. They in each studio at the workshop, they had Philips professional tape recorders, the 3, and then one other recorder, which acted as a master recorder. So if you wanted to put anything together, you were limited almost to 3 lines. And you stood there and said 1, 2, 3, go, and press the buttons simultaneously. And if you're lucky, they'd run in sync. So that's why things sounded a bit thinner. So you couldn't get the layers that you would be able to do later. There was no digital recording. There was no proper sequencing. The best sequencer was 256 events. The others hadn't been invented. The sequencer we'd been working on, Electron, was going to be 26,000 events. It's on 16 different layers. So you can see the change in the technology outside the Radiophonic workshop. And most professional recording studios had immensely superior equipment to what we had.
Was it just not the budget to buy it?
Sorry?
Was it just not the budget to buy it?
There wasn't a budget at all. This is the problem with the Radiophonic workshop. It was set up without a budget. So it existed on what I used to call fag ends and lollipops. Fag ends was money left over from other people's budgets that hadn't been spent that year. And lollipops were things they stuffed into Desmond's mouth to shut him up because he said, we haven't got any money. And it usually would be things like a certain department had bought a certain device which turned out not to be as good as they thought it was, so they'd dump it on us. And several things ended up our way that way. I mean, there was one wonderful thing when Aubrey Singer took over, when we were suddenly offered, because Paddy Kingston wanted to do a rock musical, we were offered this 22-channel Rupert Neve desk, cost of which was about 60 to 70,000 pounds. And it was very nice, but we didn't need that level of sophistication. What we needed was an intermediate level, things which were easy for us to manipulate. So when Aubrey Singer took over, he'd just come back from Japan, had seen modern technology there. He took over as manager and director of radio. He brought a load of very talented, perceptive people with him, one of whom became head of resources radio. And he came and he got the full whinge. I mean, I was good at a whinge. I had perfected the art. And he said, all right, would you mind if I bring Director of Resources Television over? A guy called Michael Chetland, who later became Director General. And I said, no, I'd love to meet him. So he came over, was impressed with what he saw. He got the real full-blown double winch and said, write me a paper on where you envisage you want to be in 10 years' time. So I did. And I asked him for £160,000 a year. Being bold, when people say, what do you want? You ask for twice as much and you get a quarter of it. So he wrote back and he said, right, I will allocate you £60,000 a year on condition that radio offer you another 40 as a budget every year. So you can start realizing your plan. And that just transformed things. By then, of course, we started to rebuild the Cynthia 100 because I'd forbidden Dudley Simpson to use it again because he was using it 4 of every 5 days of the week doing Doctor Who. So I said, no, you've got stuff in studios, you can do it outside studios now. So we started dismantling the Cynthia 100, which was our major synthesizer. I gave the sequencer to Cardiff University because theirs are broken down. I wasn't very popular. I mean, we were going to do all the new modules in. The rest of the staff were a bit bewildered that their major synthesizer had been pulled apart. And we were going to call the new one the Phoenix because it was going to rise from the ashes. Well, something happened. It's called MIDI, the musical digital interface, which really blew voltage control out the water. And so when you are on a road looking towards a brick wall, like the end of voltage control, you have to say, right, let's stop. And now I've got a budget. I can start buying all the new wonderful Japanese equipment. And that's where we started. I also, when I went back, I was very careful about cultivating all the house services who knew where all the nooks and crannies in Maida Vale were, because I wanted to expand the number of studios from what was basically 3.5 to 6, because I had 6 composers. And they worked through the night and the day. And so I then started looking at other equipment. There was a company, now I'm talking about the Neve desk, Swiss manufacturer, precision engineer, wonderful. There was a little British company called Soundcraft who were making very nice desks. And I said I would like to buy some of those. And I said, for the price of that Neve desk, I could have transformed this place just with that one piece of equipment. So I would like to buy Soundcraft desks. And chief engineer, radio broadcasting at one of our technical meetings, said, I will have those desks in BBC over my dead body. And I murmured, I'm sure that could be arranged, and got promptly, severely told off by head of resources, quite rightly so. But I mean, Bill, who was chief engineer, he was a nice, reasonable guy, and he just laughed. And he said, right, I will appoint one of my senior engineers to go and visit Soundcraft, and I bet you he'll tell you they're not suitable for use. And so this senior engineer came back and said, they're wonderful, they're marvelous. And they're like 1/20th of the price of all these other desks we're buying. So I got my way and I was able to equip the 6 studios over, I think it was 4 years, and get multi-track machines in. And it eventually got to the point where the chief engineer for Yamaha, the chief research engineer, considered the Radiophonic workshop to be the most sophisticated environment in Europe, which I thought was quite a compliment. And of course, wonderful things like John Chowning discovering frequency modulation happened. which Yamaha picked up and made a big thing of. So, yeah, I left it. Then, of course, John Burt was appointed as Director General, and so everything stopped in its tracks for 2 years while we spun around like an abandoned ship that the engines had gone down and not knowing what was happening. And he introduced internal costing. And of course, there was no way the Radiophonic workshop could justify its premises. We were being charged the rent, the rates, the electricity, the rates at London West End rates, charged for engineers, charged for depreciation of all this wonderful equipment I'd just spent hundreds of £1,000s on, charged for the lady who...
So we're in the 90s at this stage? This is the 90s now?
Yeah, we're in the 90s, yeah. So we were given 2 years to break even. So we were even being charged for all the accountants, hundreds of them. And there's no way I could do it. So I started, I spent 2 years with spreadsheets, making myself ill, basically. And so just cutting corners here, there, everywhere. So eventually I realized the only non-productive members of the department were myself and my secretary. So we had to go. So I applied for early retirement, which I spent 6 months preparing for. It was so badly handled eventually when I'd gone by program operations who were taking over the department that they didn't even bother transferring the telephones from Maida Vale to Broadcasting House but over a week. So suddenly Radiophonic ceased to exist. Was a big gap for nobody could get in touch. So a couple of them managed to survive on for another couple of years, bit by bit, but there was no way we could possibly ever break even with all of those overheads. Whereas, if we'd been individual people, we'd have bought cheaper premises, things like that.
So the BBC Radiophonic Workshop was world renowned for the quality it was producing.
Yeah.
But for most of its time, it was really struggling with the actual materials. But what you had was a lot of talent.
A lot of nerve as well. You really sometimes had to bluff your way through. The nice thing about what I achieved was in the early days, you were fighting with the equipment all the time. So you had a deadline. Things would take weeks and weeks to do. You had a deadline. And if it wasn't really quite what you wanted it to be, you just had to use it. By the end of it, you were struggling with the music. The musical problems, the equipment you could take for granted.
Back in 1983, you were there for Longleat. Do you have any memories of that particular massive convention?
John Nathan Turner rang me up and said, we're launching a Doctor Who exhibition in Longleat. So would you like to come to the press launch? So I said, yep. So I knew nothing about it. Dick knew something about it, but he'd not bothered telling me. So I was at the press launch and I'd just taken a mouthful of white wine. And John said, and this is the orangery where the radiophonic display will be. And people in front of me got heavily sprayed with white wine. I had to decide what we were going to do. So what I said was, right, all of you guys who've been working on Doctor Who, think of your favorite sounds. Each of you do a presentation, and we'll take it in turns. And so, Dick would talk about certain things, like Malcolm would talk about different things. And I was assured by Radio Enterprises, BBC Enterprises, who were organising the event, that all the equipment I needed would be there. I'm always very suspicious when I'm assured that everything is going to be all right. So I said, well, we've got to take our own tape recorders and we'll take a mixing desk because there are bound to be, it's BBC television sound. There'll be loudspeakers there. We got there. There was an empty marquee with two 13-amp sockets, no loudspeakers. And we eventually managed to get a loudspeaker from a radio shop that had been in their basement for hundreds of years and nobody wanted. So we started off mono. And then, of course, head of television enterprise and the Marquis of Bath came in to see what we were up to. And so I publicly said, I would like to apologize to my audience. All of this sound should be in glorious stereo, but unfortunately, television enterprises have neglected to provide any loudspeakers. And head of television enterprises disappeared at that point. And 20 minutes later, a pair of wonderful BBC loudspeakers appeared, and we were fine enough. We had a lot of fun, but as we were motoring down there, we kept saying, "There's an awful lot of traffic around today." Where were they all going? Never dreaming they were going to Longleat. And then as we approached Longleat, via a special route we were going in by, the radio on the car was on, and it says, police are advising all traffic around Longleat to stop. This event is already oversubscribed. You're not going to be able to get in. So millions of kids burst into tears as we've driven home. It was just jam-packed. There was one lovely moment when Desmond Briscoe, who was still head, I was only the organizer then, he appeared and a little boy went up to him and said, "Didn't you used to be Desmond Briscoe?" And looked down at him and said, "As far as I'm aware, I still am." Fans would come up and they'd have tape recorders secreted up their arms. They would play that again, you play that again. Nobody had made any arrangements seriously about how we were going to eat or anything like that. So eventually I found out that the refreshments were being laid on in the stately home.
Who needs to eat anyway?
Sorry?
Who needs to eat anyway?
Well, it's all right for you living an ordinary profitable life, but I quite like.
Speaking of the Radiophonic Workshop live performing, I've seen a few clips on YouTube of a few composers. Yeah, were you involved with that? You were involved with that, weren't you?
No, I was approached by the group, and my reply was, "Nobody's interested in an 80-year-old white-haired man with wobbly legs going on tour with a group." So
unless you're in the Rolling Stones.
So I decided I didn't have half the talent of the Rolling Stones, I tell you. No, they did it. They played Glastonbury on the Pyramid Stage. They did all sorts of major events. They came to Norwich, which is in my nearest city. They mounted a concert there, and I went to it. No, I think their concert's good. I went to several concerts they did. One in one of the concert rooms at the festival hall, Royal Albert Hall, and it was good. It was really good, interesting, exciting. One of my cousins was over from Australia, and he was at Glastonbury, and he said it was wonderful. He said it blew his mind to see all these guys and hearing all things he recognised, including there is a Doctor Who suite they did, which was part of the concert. A lot of Peter Howell's amazing music and stuff they composed specially. There's a lovely one of Paddy Kingsland, which was based on the shipping forecast. Ferrar's Cromarty, and who just Paddy has such an amazing imagination. It was just terrific, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Now, after you left the radiophonic workshop in the 90s, you had a. I just have to ask, how did you end up going into hypnotherapy? I'm very curious about that.
In 1984, just after my father died, I was a very heavy smoker. I was smoking 60 to 80 a day, which means they usually mostly end up in ashtrays rather than being smoked. But I think for a boy, when his father dies, it's a fairly traumatic event because, he's always stood between you and the angel of death. And now, you're next in line.
Next in line.
Yeah. And it's time when you find you tend to make decisions about the rest of your life. And I suddenly decided one of my decisions was that I really wanted to give up smoking. So I booked a session with this man in Harley Street. I couldn't even remember his name. And so I went in there, and first thing he said, "Hello, my friend." And I thought, oh, what a funny voice. I can't go with that. And he put his hand on my shoulder, and I don't like people touching me uninvited. Anyway, he sat down, and I was in the chair, and he was droning on and on and on. And I was sitting there thinking, oh, Christ, I wish he'd just bloody go and I could have a fag. Anyway, finished, and I thought, that's another waste of 35 quid. I said, have you got any cigarettes on you? And I said, yeah. And he had this big box, and I put the cigarettes in. Got outside, thought, where's the nearest tobacconist? And I thought, no, I'll go later. And I haven't smoked since. So, so when I left the BBC, I'd always had some sort of healing gift, which it wasn't a conscious thing. It was just I was able, to deal with certain things. So I fought it around 6 months, and then I found a college that did a BTEC in complementary healthcare, based in St Charles Hospital in Ladbroke Grove. So I enrolled there for 3 years. And gradually, when I finished the course, I started working with a friend I'd met on there called Anna. And we inherited from one of our supervisors a practice in a ladies' health salon on the dogs in a supermarket. So we did a bit there. And then one of our supervisors said, look, I'm leaving the business, but I rent a room occasionally in Harley Street. Would you like to take it over? So we did that. But I was really, because John Lewis had died of AIDS, and a lot of my friends, really wonderful, talented people, had died of AIDS, I decided I would volunteer for Body Positive, one of the AIDS charities, doing complementary things. We're talking before combination therapy, when there was, basically you were told you've got AIDS, go off and die, and if it becomes too awkward, we'll give you some treatment, but there's nothing we can do, you're going to die. And I just thought, that's really not the way to do it. So I started devising things to give people confidence to begin to take charge of their own treatments, and not to be thinking, oh, I'm going to die and everyone hates me because I've got AIDS, And so it was really building people's confidence, giving them tools to relax. And I was developing some really quite good therapies. but only really to make life bearable. That's all we could do. I also did Reiki, which I studied because I was a Reiki practitioner. I was also a volunteer. Looking back, I still can't believe that people still give a shit about what we did.
Well, I know you're not a fan, so you really don't appreciate it. But for fans, what the work that you've done really, really is important to us. So thank you very much for all that work that you did back then. It's utterly amazing, and thanks for spending some time
Still
with
be
us.
used today.
Yep.
Sorry.
It's
Yeah,
still being
that's
used
what I was
today.
saying. I had a very nice letter or email from Russell T. Davis on Christmas Eve. Just talking about my contribution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. It's been great to learn a bit more about you and talk about those years that you were working back then and other things that you've done too. It's been fascinating. Thank you. This has been the Sirens of Audio with our very special guest Brian Hodgson and your hosts Philip Edney and Dwayne Bunny. Theme music by Joe Kramer. Catch up with all the latest info, including news on our live events at sirensofaudio.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our brand new podcast, Blake 7, The Way Back. Contact us via email at sirensofaudio@gmail.com or find us on all our social media at Audio Sirens. Thanks for listening, audiophiles. We'll hear you next time.